Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and very good day to everyone. So how's your day today? Hope that you are doing well and you are getting more interested to do research. Well, for today we will discuss about topic 8, which is about quantitative data collection methods. In this session, this is what most probably we want to achieve. The first one, I'm going to introduce you to another method in doing quantitative research. If you still remember, before this we have done about survey, and today we're going to focus on another method, which is experimental design. Have you heard about experimental design before? Well, now let's have a look. Okay, so this is what we have done in the last class, in the last session. We have discussed a lot about survey, and today this is what we're going to do. We're going to discuss about experimental research. Well, so when talking about experimental research, it is said that this is a kind of research that involves action taken, as well as after action has been taken, we observe the consequences of the actions on our so-called sample or our respondent. So here is a bit different than what we have discussed in survey. In this kind of or type of method, we conduct a few or some what we call intervention, and we see what is the effect. People also say that when we're talking about experimental research, it is about we are controlling certain influences on the independent variables, so that we want to see what is the effect. Alright, so what we have actually introduced, or the intervention situation, we consider it as independent variables, while we want to see how these independent variables, how this intervention, how this action actually affect the whole what we call study. And when we do experimental research, it is something that we do a kind of observation, and we record our data and we observe based on the independent variables that we impose to our so-called respondent. Well, let's take a look on another explanation about experimental research. Is a kind of what we call a research that we may use a coding sheet to record, to observe, and after that we will analyze our data, and we may also have sort of like a questionnaire in order to evaluate, in order to judge, or in order to assess the what we call intervention or independent variables that we impose on our respondent. So what I can say about this experimental research, it is a kind of a research which we impose something and we assess the effect. Why it is considered as a quantitative research? It is because there is element of controlling the one of the variables, the independent variables. Well, so now takes a look on the how actually experimental research can be conducted. First, we must have what we call explanatory claim. This is a kind of statement or assumption about something. And in this kind of research, we do have what we call hypothesis. We may say that whenever youngsters or children exposed to the what we call crime scenes in the television, in the movie, they will get affected. This is our hypothesis. And after that, we need to identify what is our variables. And the next process of this experimental research is we going to design our experimental. Is it going to be in a room? Is it going to be somewhere else? How are we going to impose the independent variables? Is it through viewing something? Is it through doing something? This is what we call the design of experimental. And later on, when we impose our so-called variables and then we do observation, this is where I mentioned just now, we do the coding and so on, and then we take record, we take a data, and later on what we will do is we will analyze and produce a report. So this is the whole process of what we call the experimental research models. Now, let's move on to another section where we are going to discuss in detail what are those experimental research design that usually people do. When we talk about this, what we call types of experimental design, according to Campbell and Stanley, they claim that there are at least 3 categories of what we call experimental design. The first one we call pre-experimental design. The second one we call it as quasi-experimental design, and the third one what they call as a true experimental design. Under these 3 main category, we have another 9 what we call types of experimental design. So let's move to the first one, the first category, which is pre-experimental design. In this pre-experimental design is a kind of experimental that done in a very simple manner. The first type is what we call as one-shot case study. In this, what we'll do is we're going to impose our independent variables or intervention, and then we're going to see what is the effect. We need to see that we impose independent variables and then we observe on the one group. The second type, what we call as one group pre-test, post-test design. In this second type, meaning to say that we're going to observe the same group that we analyze before and after we impose our independent variables or after we impose our intervention. This is where we have OA, group OA, and then we impose the independent variable which is X, and then we will again test or evaluate on this same group the effect of the independent variables. Well, the third types of what we call this experimental design under pre-experimental design is what we call as static group comparison. So here is a kind of combination of one-shot case study as well as one group pre-test, post-test design. In these third types of experimental design, we're going to have 2 groups. The first group, OA, we will assess them after we impose our independent variables, after we impose our intervention. So after for example, after we show them the movie of a crime scene, or after we impose or we show them a movie related to any aggressive action, and then we evaluate what is the effect. And at the same time, we have what we call as group OB. This group OB is a group that we didn't impose any intervention, we just directly do our assessment on this so-called group, and after that we compare these two. So this is the first main category of experimental design. Well, next move to the second category of experimental design. This is what we call as quasi-experimental design. For this quasi-experimental design, again, they also have three types of them. The first type of them, we call it as a time series design. Well, if you look at the slide that I'm showing now, the time series meaning to say that we will assess or we will evaluate the group that we are studying in a few so-called times, in a few incidents of time. Maybe today we assess them, tomorrow we assess them again, and then the next following day we assess them again, then only we impose the independent variables. So after that, we will do the same thing a few times to assess them. This is what we call time series design. The next is what we call non-equivalent control group design. This is where what we'll do is we will compare a group that we impose the independent variables and a group that we don't impose the independent variable, but we will assess them twice, before and after. For the group that we didn't impose any independent variables, we're going to assess them twice as well, at the beginning and at the end of the time that we evaluate the group that we impose the independent variable. And the third one is what we call multiple time series design. This is something which is the combination of time series and also non-equivalent control group design, which is we have two groups, so we're going to assess them a few times, and then one group we will impose the independent variables, and then we will evaluate them again for a few times, and then we compare these two groups. Okay, this is what we call the multiple time series design. And the last categories of experimental design is true experimental design. Under this true experimental design, we have three types of them. The first one, what we call pre-test, post-test control group design. The difference between this category and the other two that I've mentioned just now is that in these kind of categories, we select the respondent, or we select people involved in this research randomly, whereas in other two categories we didn't do that. The pre and post control group design, it is we compare one group that be imposed with the independent variables and another group which we didn't impose anything. So the next, the type number, the 8 kind types of experimental design is post-test only control group design. In this research, what we'll do is we will identify a randomly group, and then we will impose the independent variables. At the same time, we compare to another group which we didn't impose any independent variables. And the 9th one is what we call Salomon 4 groups design. In this Salomon 4 groups design, it is combination of pre-test, post-test, and post-test only control. So mean to say that we're going to have 4 groups. These 4 groups, 2 groups will be imposed with independence, and another group that imposed with independence will be tested before and after. So altogether, there are 9 types of what we call this experimental design. Well, I hope that you are now getting much clearer with what is experimental design. And if you like to have further and much detail about this experimental design, you can read this book by Baxter and Baby, chapter number 9, which discuss in detail. So I think that's all for now. Thank you very much and see you again next time. Assalamu alaikum. Well, see you again. Thank you.